Welcome to the Get Real Podcast, your high-octane boost of full-on reality therapy for personal, business, and investing success with your host, Ron Phillips, because somebody's got to tell it like it is.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Get Real Podcast. Ron Phillips here. I am on location today. I'm in Tampa. Came down to the RentVine conference. RentVine is a property management software, if you didn't know. Great people, great software. Came down here to showcase our Lineage technology, our platform, which in a future episode I will I'll do a better job of introducing. We came down here we have a booth and talking to people a little bit about property management and asset management, how they intertwine. Going to do a show on asset management as well. I'm very excited about that. Excited about what we're doing for the industry. You know, it's category creating. I mean, in the single family home world, what we're building at Lineage does not exist. And so anyway, really excited about it. That's just a teaser. We'll talk about that on another show. But I've been down here talking to people about the real estate market, and it's really interesting. I've done a lot of research over the last several weeks. Some of this stuff you're going to say, Ron, you've said this before, but I'm going to try to put this together so that I think you can understand. I see on social media so much that people are comparing today to 2007 and the period prior to 2007, the period prior to what we have now. And there's so many challenges with that. And I just want to break down some of them. Okay. Let's start. So in my mind, I would start with, okay, this is a supply demand thing. There's a lot of different levers. Well, first off, let's just talk about supply versus demand. Okay. Back in 2007, okay, there are single family starts, which is a new construction start, right? We have building permits, which means there's more units that are going to be built. They're not started yet. And then you have completions, units that are completed, delivered to the market. Okay. I want to go through those numbers just from new construction. Okay. So we're not talking about how many homes were on the market. We're just talking about new construction starts. So in 2007, at the peak, there were 1.7 million units started. In addition to that, there was 1.6 million units in permitting, and there were 1.6 million units completed. Now, contrast that with today, okay? And this gets even worse when you take into consideration how many units weren't built over the last many years. But let's just apples to apples, okay? So current, we're at 1.01 million units. That was in 2024. Single family starts. Okay, building permits, 1.48 million. And then completions, 1.03 million. So they're not the same. Okay. They're not the same. We have well over 1 million excess units. And let me see where this other statistic is. So the supply side, let's talk about the demand side. 2007, demand was inflated due to these lax lending standards. Okay, so we had a massive amount of demand. That poured over into the speculation and speculative buying, because you could literally buy anything. I've been over the crazy loans that they had at the time. You could buy property and get money back at closing. You could put a property under contract. By the time you closed, it had gone up in value enough that you could literally get cash back at closing. It was an insane time. In 2025, there is significant pent-up demand And if you think about it, I mean, think about if you were a first-time buyer. I mean, you may be as you're listening to this. But those of you who are my age, imagine if you were a first-time home buyer and you're constrained by the affordability and the inventory shortages. So we don't have enough inventory for all of the pent-up demand. And people keep talking about, well, we have more inventory now than we did last year. Well, yeah, okay. That may be the case, but we have a lot of demand that's just sitting there. They can't afford the prices that's due to a bunch of different factors, which we'll get into. But in 2007, there was tons of speculation, just tons of speculation. And in specific markets, it was out of control. In 2025, the demand is literally genuine need. Now, that genuine need is constrained by affordability and supply issues, but the need doesn't go away just because the people can't afford what they need, right? The demand is still there. Okay, so that's the demand for purchase. Let's talk about affordability, because I do think that's important to discuss for sure. The 30-year mortgage rate in 2007 was 6.5. Now, I know nobody remembers that because we've had well over a decade of ridiculous mortgage rates. But rates back in, when I started selling real estate in 2005, from 2005 to 2007, the interest rates were in the 7s and in the 6s. That's where they were. Fast forward to today, same thing. I mean, interest rates are basically the same. So that's not necessarily the issue. And let's talk about income. In 2007, the median household income was right around $50,000. Okay, in 2007. Well, today, the median household income is almost $80,000, 79 and change. Okay, so we went from 49 and change to 79 and change. Now, you may be saying the same thing I'm saying. That's not enough of an increase. I would agree with that, but it is an increase. In share of median income, your mortgage in share of median income, let's compare the peak of the market. Okay. The peak of the market, the share was 45%. Share of median income. That was actually at the end of, it was just before 2007. That was the peak of the unaffordability. Today, and when I say today, I'm using stats that are from March of 2025. So it's not literally today. This is like a quarter ago. But the share of median income needed to buy a house is 46%. So, I understand. I do understand how in the last couple of years things have gotten completely upside down with how they were for if you actually look at a graph from 2009, right after the crash, from 2009 all the way to basically till COVID. Okay, from 2009 through COVID, that's a long time. So it's well over 10 years. Everything was very affordable. Very affordable. It felt really good. Anybody can go buy a house because you could afford it. Now, one thing that happened during this 10 years that didn't happen pre-crash is that the lending is not lax. So you actually had to have some money. You had to be able to qualify for a loan during this time period. But still, price points were in check, and we had ridiculously low rates, which made everything feel comfy. Of course, now it doesn't feel great. But I keep telling you guys, the Atlanta Fed has this thing called the Home Affordability Monitor. You can go look at it for yourself. Go take a look and see what the most unaffordable time to buy a house was back pre-crash. It was July of 2006. And then come and look at what the most unaffordable, like what it is right now. It's 1 percentage point off. It was 45% back then. It's 46% now. Okay. So, I mean, when you look at all the memes on Facebook, Instagram, your social media of choice, keep in mind that the data, the actual data, when you actually go look at it, it's not that much different than it was prior. However, there's not massive speculation going on. You actually have to qualify for a loan. The majority of the people have equity. There's a lot of differences between the two time periods. But home affordability is not one of them. It just feels way, way worse today than it felt back then, because we've had all of this time to forget what it feels like to have homes not be terribly affordable. Now, some might say, well, yeah, Ron, that's exactly why home prices have to come down. Well, maybe, but people are calling for them to crash like they did in 2008. Maybe. I don't think anybody actually knows, but we're going to keep going through some of this data, okay? Because it's really, really important. Okay, now, demand in 2007. Demand in 2007 was way inflated due to lax lending standards and speculative buying. We've already been over that. Well, there's a shadow demand now that is not being reported because the people can't, because we're in this unaffordability loop, right? There's this significant pent up demand, especially among first time home buyers. Okay. Now, rental demand. In 2007, rental demand was lower than it is now, and there were higher vacancies. Now, rental demand is high, and if you can't afford to buy a house because you can't afford the down payment, and maybe you can't even afford the actual payment, then what do you have to do? You have to rent. And so rental rates, while they're not going up the same as they were, there's still strong demand for rentals. And it's a real demand. So before, people were buying speculative houses. There were all of these houses. There were too many houses on the market for both for sale and for rent. People could buy a house. So the rental demand wasn't as high. It's much, much higher now. Home ownership rates back then were almost 70%. Now they're back down to closer to 60, 65%. Investors, I think we hear a lot about investors because there's hedge funds that are in the market. But back in the day, everybody was buying. You didn't have to be a hedge fund. Everybody was buying them. There was so much speculative buying going on. It was ridiculous. And the regulatory environment is entirely different. Completely opposite of what it was back then. Now, let's talk about interest rates. I hear all of the time in the memes, interest rate, the Fed's going to lower the rates, yada, yada, yada. The Fed fund rate has very little to do with the rate that you pay on your mortgage. Very little to do. And that's why sometimes when the Fed cuts the rates, the actual mortgage rates go up. They don't come down because the mortgage rates aren't tied to the Fed funds rate. Now, the experts, which again, I don't know how these experts get these jobs, but these experts suggest that a significant drop in mortgage rates could reignite buyer activity. I agree with that one. If interest rates go down a percentage point, there's going to be a ton of people that are going to come back into the market. A ton. Matter of fact, let me go back to this home ownership affordability. When the interest rates go down, let's see here, they're at 6.9 there. So if we can get them, let me find a time when they were actually at 5.9 or somewhere around there. There we go. That's 5%. So share of median income, that's from 40 to 46% just in that 1% swing of interest rates. So if nothing with home prices changes, there's a whole bunch more people who can then come into the market and afford to buy. So of course it's going to do that. Of course it's going to do that. Interest rates, let's see, a half a point decrease in mortgage rates can significantly enhance a buyer's purchasing power. On a $300,000 loan, a half a point drop reduces the monthly payments by $100 to $150. That's not insignificant. This reduction can make homeownership more feasible for households that are previously priced out of the market. Because again, interest rates aren't coming down and prices thus far haven't come down. Now, in just a second, I'm going to talk about the headlines because the headlines are completely misleading. Estimated increase in potential buyers per half point drop. Okay, this is really important. Approximately 76.4 million U.S. households, which is 57% of the households, are currently unable to afford a $300,000 home. Assuming a half a point interest rate reduction enables another 5% of those households to afford that house. So, about 3.8 million households enter the market with every half point rate drop. Let me say that again because it's important. That's 3.8 million people, households, per half point rate drop. So if the rates come down a full point, that's 7.6 million. 1.5, 11 million. That is an insurmountable number because we haven't built enough houses. Again, back to the supply versus demand. Now, let's talk about house prices. There are markets across the country where house prices have actually gone down. The majority of the markets have had price increase reductions year over year. Now, that is a substantially different thing. But the headlines are still going to say house prices have gone down. It's very similar to how the government says when they're cutting spending, right? When the government says we've cut spending. No, they didn't. They didn't cut spending. They cut the amount of increase of spending that was already planned. That's what they cut. They didn't actually cut any spending. But the headline is going to read huge, massive cuts to the budget, right? Almost has never happened. In my lifetime, I think it's only happened once. I might be wrong. It might have happened twice. They don't actually cut the budget ever. They only cut the increase in the budget and they call it a budget. They call it a cut. Same headlines happen with the rental market, with the real estate market. If there's a decrease in the increase, they call it price cut. That's not the same thing as losing money on your property. Because if your property is worth the same or a little bit more as it was last year, that's not a loss. By definition, that's not a loss. But the headline's still going to say that. Now, if you live in a market where the prices have actually come down, where you actually lost some money, okay, there are some of those. There's just not as many of them as is being reported. Okay? Now, this is interesting. In 2025, the median price of a new single-family home, $460,000. About 75% of U.S. households can't afford that house. That's a problem, okay? And because that's almost all of what's being built. So what's the feasibility of building homes below the national average? So construction costs account for about 64, almost 65% of the average price of a home. And they're up. That's up. In 2022, it was 60%. Now it's 65%. That's largely due to the inflation in the building materials and labor shortages. If you don't have enough laborers, if you don't have enough people who are skilled workers, well, then those people can charge more. Again, supply demand. Land and regulatory expenses. Well, the cost of finished lots actually is down. But zoning regulations is out of control. I really need to have my builder friend on from Missouri with what they're doing over there. It's absolutely insane. And then later, labor shortage. I think labor shortage is maybe even the bigger piece of this. A decline in residential building labor force is increasing costs. Okay. So what is being done about the large price and of the median home? Well, people are building smaller homes. I think long term, there's going to be some cool, innovative construction methods that might bring down costs. But right now, a lot of what I'm seeing is people are building smaller homes. This is the only way to really do it. And then there's zoning that is hampering the ability for builders to build the product that actually people can afford and that actually people are buying, which is another problem. Again, let's see. Now, mortgage rates. Let's go over mortgage rates again, just to kind of close this up, because this is pretty much where everybody spends most of their time. 2007, the average 30-year fixed rate mortgage was around 6.68%. Subprime lending, also prevalent. Those rates were, they had these teaser rates, really low rates, and then they would go up. And a lot of people lost properties because of that. In 2025, average 30-year fixed rate mortgage, 6.81%. So basically sixes, basically the exact same thing. This is important. 73% of the people who have mortgages, okay? 73% of the people who have mortgages, they're below 5%. 55% of the people who have mortgages, the rates are below 4%. And 21% have rates below 3%. Which is why these people aren't selling their houses, because they have really, really good payments. And that's going to continue to create a problem with demand. Unless interest rates come down, where these people can justify moving from one of these ridiculously low interest rates into something else. It's also why I still haven't seen, and don't foresee this massive foreclosure crisis that people keep talking about. All right. I'm not sure how in the world that happens when the majority of the people who own a home not only have a really good interest rate, but they also have a significant amount of home equity. All right. In 2007, the mortgage market had the majority of them they had a vast number larger than today of high risk loans. No doc loans, interest-only mortgages, all kinds of things they were doing back then. And there was almost no regulatory oversight because the government made it that way so that more people could own homes. Fast forward to today, well, if you've been through the mortgage underwriting process, the standards are much higher, and there's a ton of regulatory framework that was put in by the exact same people who got rid of the regulatory framework to begin with. All right. 2007, mortgage delinquency rates surged every single year as the adjustable rate mortgages reset to higher rates because they couldn't refinance again because the rates weren't any higher, right? 2025, the mortgage delinquency rate is really, really low. 1.77%. That's really low. Serious delinquency rates have seen minor upticks, but nothing staggering. Yeah, mortgage delinquency rate. Guys, if the mortgage delinquency rates don't spike dramatically, I don't understand how in the world we could even have anywhere even close to the same kind of a challenge that we had in 2007. Okay, this is good. Population growth. So population in 2007, approximately 301 million. Population 2025, 342 million. That's an increase of 41 million people. Assuming the average household is 2.6 people, that's 15.8 million additional housing units needed to accommodate all of those people. All right. Well, between 2000 and 2023, we built 9.5 million. 2024, we built about a million. That's 10.5 million. Projected almost a million in 2025 because the number's coming down a little bit. That is 11.4 million single-family homes completed. That's a 4.4 million single-family home deficit that we still have just from population growth. It's a big deal. It is a big deal. Current mortgage delinquency, conventional loans, delinquency rate increased to 2.7%. Foreclosure starts, by the way, are at 0.2%. 0.2%. Overall delinquency rates at 4.04% in 2025 so far. FHA loan rate, delinquency rate decreased to 10.62. It was actually a little higher in 2024. And VA loans are at 4.63. Equity, another big one. In order for people to lose their homes, they have to be in default. They have to have not enough equity to be able to sell their property. They're not in a spiked default state right now. And equity, let's talk about that. Total home equity of U.S. homeowners is approximately $35 trillion. That is an all-time high, never been higher. The average homeowner with a mortgage has about $313,000 in equity. That's, guys, tappable home equity is like $11 trillion. The majority of the people have enough equity to weather a storm. They can, if they can't afford the house anymore, they could sell it and get out. There are about 48 million homeowners who have mortgages. That means there's a lot. There's a lot that don't even have a mortgage. Yeah, I mean, so you guys can figure this out. I don't want to keep spitting stats at you, but there's just not a massive distressed seller market out there. It's not there. They say there's a shadow one, but in order to have a shadow delinquency out there, those people would also have to have no equity or very little equity. The inability for them to sell and get out of those properties, which is not the case. The vast majority of them have equity. So rising home equity, stable delinquency rates suggests most homeowners are well positioned to weather financial challenges. Again, I don't understand. I don't see where all of this is coming from. I could go for an hour today on the stats that are completely different than 2007. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean that I believe that home prices are just going to continue to soar? No. Does it mean that I think that rent rates are just going to continue to soar? No, I don't. Does it mean that I think we're going to have a collapse like we did in 2008? No, I don't. We're probably going to have a slowing. But there's a bunch of levers that could make that slowing a spike pretty quickly. If interest rates actually do come down a half a point or a point, we are going to have a massive, massive supply shortage on our hands. And prices are going to go up again. So keep that in mind as you're thinking through. Number one, keep that in mind when you're reading headlines and looking at Facebook, Instagram, social media posts. Because there's always something that is not being reported, and there's nearly always something that is being misreported when it comes to real estate. All right? Okay. So until next time, when potentially we'll talk about lineage, I'm not sure just yet. Until next time, get out there and make something happen.
This has been the Get Real Podcast. To subscribe and for more information, including a list of all episodes, go to getrealestatesuccess.com.